One of the big dilemmas many foreigners face when moving to Japan is, do I move to the city or do I move to the countryside? Especially when it comes to improving your Japanese abilities. And time again, I notice the same advice being repeated on the internet, which is people recommending, well, if you want to make your Japanese better, move to the countryside, because people in the countryside don't speak English. Everybody in the city speaks English. The temptation to use English instead of Japanese will be too great. So, the countryside. And personally, I disagree with this advice. The chief reason I disagree here is that while it might be true there are less people in the countryside who can speak English, it's also true that in the countryside there just aren't that many people, period. So as I mentioned in a previous video, Japan has a big problem right now with a rapidly aging and shrinking population, and in the countryside, all across Japan, the vast majority of the people living there are quite elderly, and I can definitely vouch on this as someone who used to live in the countryside myself. Now, if you want to make friends with older people in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, all the power to you, honestly. There are wonderful people, elderly people, who they show a lot of foreigners kindness. They're impressed that you take an interest in their culture. You might get invited into their home, and it's a wonderful and beautiful thing, exchanging culture like that. But realistically, most of the people moving into Japan, either recent college grads or people coming to Japan to study, are probably in their 20s, early 20s, and let's be honest, probably looking for people their same age to socialize with. Aside from having an easier time making friends, being in the city, being surrounded by all of the people available to you are just extra opportunities to practice and improve your language abilities. Every single person you see in those crowded street crossings or trains or restaurants, every single person you come across, it's potential speaking practice for you to improve your Japanese. Whereas if you live in the countryside, realistically, you might end up in a situation where you're just kind of finding yourself in your room, cracking the books, the websites, the apps, just studying on your own without many chances to actually get out and speak to people. Now, going back to the point about, in Tokyo, everybody can speak English and it'll be too tempting and you'll keep falling back on English rather than practicing Japanese. Well, if you have experience traveling to European cities and everybody speaks English there and it's really easy and convenient to travel because everybody can help you, that's actually not exactly the reality here in Tokyo. So while it might be true that Tokyo has the highest number of English speakers anywhere in Japan, that number is still really low, especially compared to a European country. It's a big problem that Japan needs to tackle within their education system. Japanese people just in general are not very good with English, and I feel a little bad saying that, but it really is just the reality, and if you live here, you'll find that out very fast. So learn Japanese, it'll serve you well over here. Now, let's say you're in Tokyo, and even if you do come across someone who speaks English, so what? Push yourself. Talk to them in Japanese anyway. You have to think about, when you're an English speaker, a native English speaker, and someone comes up to you speaking English to you, you'll probably just want to do what's easiest and reply in English. But you have to remember that the reverse is true too with Japanese people. If someone comes up to a Japanese person speaking Japanese, they're also going to want to do what's easiest and just reply back in Japanese, if you're at that level where you can have a conversation. Now, once in a while, and probably other Japanese-speaking foreigners have experienced this as well, sometimes you get someone really stubborn who, even though you keep replying to them in Japanese, they'll keep replying to you in English. And again, I want to stress this is quite rare when you come across someone like this. But hey, you know something? I'm stubborn too. Be just as stubborn as they are. Sometimes it must be pretty funny when people are watching the situation unfolding. You have a Japanese person who keeps replying in English, and I keep replying in Japanese, and most of the time, my stubbornness pays off, and then they end up switching to Japanese, and then we continue the conversation in Japanese. Now, you might think, oh, you feel a little bad being stubborn like that. Maybe they just want to practice their English. But the way I look at it is, hey, we're in Japan. I'm sorry, but the priority for me to improve my Japanese is a little more urgent. Now, if the shoe was on the other foot and we were in the United States, then hey, it's your priority. We're in the USA, you need to improve your English. And I would be more than happy to help with this person practicing their English. But we're in Japan, it's natural to speak Japanese. I don't think it's anything to feel bad about. Now, another valuable point to bring up, dating. So when I lived on rural Awaji Island, I would use dating apps, and it was hard to get dates just because, as I mentioned, there's hardly any young people in the countryside. So all of the dates that I had, and literally all of them, I didn't have one single date from a girl who lived in the countryside. All of the dates I had when I lived there were with women who lived in big nearby cities, such as Osaka, Kobe, and then when I moved to Tokyo, it was the same thing. It was just as easy to meet dates on apps in Tokyo like it was in big cities of the Kansai region. And it's another valuable tool for improving your language, because with every single match I made on those apps, I would always message them in Japanese. Now, I know there's some people who have the opinion that, you shouldn't use the person you're dating to help you with the language. But while I agree that your language abilities definitely have to be at a certain level to date someone in your target language, it's hugely invaluable for improving your language abilities. I mean, it's been a huge help to me. I have a girlfriend right now. I speak to her 100% in Japanese. She's always correcting my mistakes, teaching me new words, explaining the meanings in Japanese. And I have another friend. He credits when he got a Japanese girlfriend, multiple, actually 2 different friends I can think of now. When they both got Japanese girlfriends, they said that was the biggest factor, more than anything else, that really improved their language abilities. And then the opposite too. I also have a Japanese friend who was studying abroad in Canada. He said he pretty much couldn't speak English at all when he moved to Canada, but once he started dating a girl in English, that, more than anything else, really shot up his language abilities like you wouldn't believe. Now, hey, in the countryside, there are some very attractive 80-year-olds, and if that's what you're into, that's your prerogative. Can't knock it. Aside from how much easier it is to make friends and go on dates in the city, another thing I find myself doing every single day is talking and having really, actually quite interesting and thoughtful conversations with people like store employees, restaurant staff, and, many of whom here in Tokyo are really friendly, despite what people say about Tokyoites being unfriendly. That's another thing I totally disagree with, but it could be a whole nother topic for a whole nother video. But as I mentioned, every person you're surrounded by in a city is a potential for practice and improving your language abilities. So it's just another thing to keep in mind about city life. But hey, listen, I understand. It's hard to fully trust someone who is just sitting in a chair, blabbing, sharing their opinion in their room without proving by example. So I decided to go with my friend Takumi, who you might remember from one of my earlier interviews. He talks about his experience as a Japanese person living in the USA. We went to a bar here in Tokyo and decided to speak some Japanese with the locals. Now, I just want to preface this next part by saying my Japanese is not perfect. I still have a long way to go myself, but I'm continually studying and improving my Japanese every day. And, even if I say something somewhat unnaturally, the important thing is that people can understand the point I'm trying to get across. I can understand other people. And hey, learning a language, it's a journey. It's not something that you can just do overnight, unless you have a superpower.
海外の人たちへなんか伝えたいことがありますか？このバーについて、東京について、自由が丘について。
そうですね。でもここはすごい音楽もスポーツも何でも楽しめるすごい楽しいバーになっていて、日本人だけじゃなくてすごいいろんな国からのお客さんもすごい来るので。日本で東京だけどすごいいろんな人がいてすごい楽しいところなんでぜひ来てください。
そうですね、そうです。じゃあ新宿と渋谷と比べて絶対にこのバーの中には別の感じです。
そうです。結構落ち着いててなんかすごく騒がしいわけではなくてなんか楽しいけどちょっと落ち着きもある。そういう雰囲気だと思います。
賑やかですか？あんまりクレイジーすぎるじゃないですね。
クレイジーではないかもしれない。
よかったです。おすす
めの場所ですもんね。
そうですね。絶対におすすめの場所。ありがとうございます。
So, if you're brand new in Japan and you don't have any friends here yet, or if it's tough for you to make friends, like I mentioned, go out and about, and people in bars, restaurants, stores, you can talk with the employees, and sometimes it really leads to quite the entertaining conversation. I've made good friends with, for example, I remember in an electronics store, I exchanged social media with the employee. We were talking about movies and everything with my hairstylist. We exchanged SNS also. You never know if you just talk to people. You never know the people you'll meet and the friendships you'll make. And again, it's something easier done in the city where there's more people compared to the countryside. But no matter where you are, it's still a good idea. Go out and talk to people, everybody.
この文化の中にすごく多様性が
そういろんな人がいるので、日本人も外国人もいい感じですね。自由が丘のとこもありますね。なんか渋谷とかもうなんか賑やかなとこじゃなくて、自由が丘っていうのがちょうどいいんですよ。
そうですね。そう。住んでるところとして特にちょうどいい。便利だし、そう。そして、夜にはもっと静かになってます。
そうなんですよ。ちょうどいい。賑やかな時は賑やかで、お祭りもあって、それでワールドカップとかこういうイベントが盛り上がりますし、すごい素敵な場所だな。場所、マスター、やっぱりその人柄がいいとね、すぐ来ちゃった。
でもたまに踏切はめんどくさいね。
そうね、ちょっとあそこ自由が丘ある。
それだけで弱点。
Now, this particular gentleman, when Takumi and I arrived, was by himself in the bar. And usually when you see anybody by themselves in a bar, they're often going there with the motivation to talk to people or make friends or socialize. So anytime you see someone by themselves, go up to them and talk. People usually, they have a little booze in them. They're more social than they usually are. There's nothing to be nervous about. And, you know, again, I can share a lot of stories from my life, but the people I've met just from random interactions and bars, it's pretty interesting. And in Japan, it's Japanese practice.
じゃあずっとサッカーやってましたよ。
そうです。
すごいです。まあちょっと YouTube の人たちのためちょっと説明してもらえませんか。
まあトンバヤです。まあ14年間テレビ東京のオハスタというの、一番子供向けのテレビ番組知らないね。
いや知ってます知ってます。僕の友達が
おー
JC やってる。
14年毎朝出てたのテレビで。はい、コーナートムさんのサッカーテクニック調べてみればいいね。まあ、とにかくサッカービジネスというね、昔サッカー選手に対してもう子供向きのサッカースクール、テレビ、コロコロコミックの漫画2ページ担当して14年、イベント全国47都道府県2000カ所、50万人ぐらい子供参加して。
すごいです。じゃあみんなも調べてください。
はい、そういうね。はい。
すごいすごい。そしてもともとニューヨーク出身だけど、
アメリカ生まれニューヨーク出身で、だけどまあ38年前ぐらい日本来ました。
おお、すごいですね。そしてこのバーの常連ですか。
そうね、まあよく来ますね。アイリッシュパブというね。
いい感じです。
クランね。僕のお母さんのおじさんの方みんなアイランド。
ああ、じゃあそんな
あまり関係ないけど。
アイランド誇りですね。
そうね、まあ大体帰りに仕事終わって家に帰りにこっちに寄ってちょっといっぱい飲んで帰ります。
今日もお仕事帰り。
そうです。
お疲れ様です。
はい。
Now, this interaction was another very valuable point. Even if you see someone who is also another foreigner or someone who looks like another foreigner, go up to them and speak in Japanese. I believe really strongly that you can't judge somebody or assume about them just from their appearance. You never know what kind of history somebody has in the place you're in, who may have been born here or raised here, and you have to think, for the people who do look like that, how exhausting it must be constantly having people coming up to you and assuming your native language isn't your native language, or maybe even if they have a tough time in English, going up to them and just immediately speaking English, you know, it's something to think about. So for that particular reason, I always initially approach anybody here in Japan, and I mean absolutely anybody, in Japanese first, because you just don't know their history. Now, unless they come up to me in English first, or I hear them speaking English or something like that. But if it's just from looking at someone's face, always if I'm going to approach them and say something, I'll say something in Japanese first. Now, this particular gentleman here, he was not born or raised in Japan, but he has spent many decades in Japan, more decades in Japan than in the United States. So it's, again, you look at someone, you might look at them and think, oh, are they a tourist or something? Nope, this is someone who's spent 40 years in Japan. And the fact is, we are here in Japan. It's perfectly natural to go up to somebody you don't know and speak the language of the country that you're in. If you were in the United States, for example, would you have any second thoughts about approaching someone and speaking in English? No, not at all. And I think should be the same way here in Japan. Someone you don't know or in Japan, speak to them in Japanese. It's very natural. And I can attest, as someone who lives here, that is one of many interactions I've had like that. I mean, I've had really deep conversations with people who were other foreigners, and the only reason I know they were foreigners is because they had an accent. Otherwise, like I said, you can't just assume from their face if they're a foreigner or not. But with other foreigners, we had deep conversations totally in Japanese. It's a normal thing. If you're happy to speak Japanese, probably somebody else is happy to speak Japanese too. And you know, English is a hard language for a lot of people from a lot of other countries. There's just a very real chance that they might be more advanced in Japanese than they are in English. So don't assume from someone's looks about them. Anyway, I'd say that about sums things up. I hope you found this video useful if you're moving to Japan and struggling to decide between city life or country life, especially for language learning. I am a thorough city boy through and through, and I think it's wonderful here. And no matter where you pick, I hope you have a wonderful time too.